Let's go ahead and get started.
Let's
What do you
do it.
say?
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome to Lead with Data, building vision and empowering teams with data. As we begin today, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt stuck in your job? Have you ever felt like you wanted to do better or be better, but you didn't have the right tools to do it with? Maybe you didn't know what the success criteria were. Maybe you just didn't know where to begin. I certainly have been there. And over the years, I've been really lucky to have mentors and leaders who've helped me empower myself. But I've also been able to leverage data to grow my career, to progress myself, and most importantly, to tell my story. My name is Nina Ballas, and I currently lead Tableau's product consulting team here in America. Our team helps people make decisions about Tableau, about their business strategy, and most importantly, helps people tell their stories with data. Over the past 10 years, I've invested time in helping people learn and digest technical information so that they can do better at whatever it is that they do. And throughout that time, I've come to strongly believe that data fluency and an access to technology are tools that everyone should have access to in order to be successful. That mission is what brought me to Tableau. It is why I lead the product consulting team, and it's at the root of our conversation today.
And my name is Rachel Robinson, and my Tableau story starts 5 years ago when I joined Nina's product consulting team. Now, I loved my job, and I got to work with hundreds of customers, but at the same time, it was hard for me to know how to progress my career. I felt stuck. But I also knew that my favorite part about my job was anything resembling data analysis. So I made data tools, first for myself, then for my team, then our department, then our team globally. So suddenly I found myself to be in a position where I was a data leader. But the coolest thing about this was as I was making data tools, I was seeing everyone else around me start to see their careers take shape and have access to tools to tell their story. So now, fast forward to about a year and a half ago, and I get a real live analyst job on Tableau's sales operations team. So now it's my sole mission to enable leaders just like Nina, actually including Nina, with data so that they can lead more effectively and lead with that data. So by now, we have tons of stories about how we did just that. So today, we'll talk to you about what it actually means to lead with data, how we used Tableau Blueprint concepts to create repeatable processes to do so, 3 true stories about how we drove data culture at Tableau, as well as the technical workflows and best practices we used. Finally, we'll send you home with a few quick wins, a few strategies that you can use immediately upon returning to your day job.
Excellent. So have you ever asked yourself, what do leaders actually do? And notice I'm not using the word managers. I'm using the term leaders. Now, instead of surveying the hundreds of people in here, I'll present you with the 4 themes that I've seen when I've asked this question. First and foremost, leaders define expectations. Whether we're leading people or programs or processes or projects, we define the expectations of people, of their roles, of the data, and of the outcomes. Leaders also communicate vision. That's the why we do what we do, and that's the intended success criteria, what we hope to see accomplished over the next 6 months, 18 months, and so on. Leaders empower others. And I would guess that everybody here today does this because often empowering others includes providing people with the tools, the data, the resources that they need, often the direction, and even more so the space that they need in order to be the best at whatever it is that they do. And finally, at the root of leadership, we make decisions. These might be small and mundane, or complex and difficult. But this is the essence of what our job is, day in and day out. So how on earth does data fit into leadership? This is something I highly encourage you to think about as you leave Tableau Conference today. Leaders provide a very specific role on their team, communicating vision, defining expectations, empowering others, and making decisions. And just like any other role throughout an organization, leaders use data to ensure that they're doing all of these things to the best of their ability. As the late Hans Rosling said, who helped people tell data stories globally, the idea is to go from numbers to information to understanding. And I strongly believe that whatever capacity you are leading in, this is also your goal. So this is a very high level, sort of philosophical understanding of leadership and how data fits into it, but you're probably wondering what the tactical, practical, day-to-day is supposed to look like.
Actually, lots and lots of leaders will raise their hand and say, yes, I want my org to be data-driven, but only so many know how. Now, Tableau Blueprint is Tableau's answer to that how. It is high-level strategies, it is the tactical, nitty-gritty know-how. It is a comprehensive framework for taking an org and making it data-driven. Excellent. But how do we take these enterprise concepts, these proven for the enterprise, and break them down, use them for your department, for your individual teams, for the projects, programs, outcomes, and people that matter most? Well, first we start with questions.
Excellent. And so a few years ago, I moved into a national role at Tableau. And I found myself suddenly working with people scattered across the country and tackling customer challenges that were really nuanced and diverse. And some of you might relate to this. I was trying to get my arms around all of this new responsibility, and I wasn't quite sure where to start, so I began asking questions. And as I traveled around the country surveying team members, it turns out our questions were not too dissimilar. Namely, what factors should we watch? And as we focused on this question, the conversation grew. When should we implement change? What should we prioritize? Are we doing everything we can to best serve our customers? And countless more. Some of these questions may resonate with you as well. They're common questions, they're necessary questions, but they're kind of difficult to start answering with data when you think of it at a high level. So Rachel mentioned the blueprint a second ago, and it's really easy as a leader when you have all of these questions to become very excited about creating your own blueprint or your own plan. And regardless of what problems you're solving, your plan might look like this, or it might look like this, but none of these structures are going to stand and be stable without a solid foundation. Now, the foundation is not the hippest or coolest part of any building. In fact, I doubt that any of you thought about the foundation when you walked into the Mandalay Bay today. But it's definitely necessary to have that foundation in order to build upon. And in our case, if you're looking at the blueprint, if you're looking at strategies to execute every single day in order to empower others and make decisions, the trusted and governed data source is that underlying foundation that regardless of whether users know about it or not, it needs to be there and needs to be accurate in order to succeed. So where did Rachel and I begin? Well, I went to Rachel with about 2.5 years worth of ideas to execute. And as I very excitedly explained all of these to her, she fortunately toned me down a few notches. And we discussed starting with data first and foremost. At the time, as a leader, I did not have a single data source that everybody on my team used. That meant when I was standing up and communicating vision and making decisions, I didn't have something trustworthy to make sure that that credibility was continuing to increase in front of my people. So we began to prepare. Rachel, walk us through that preparation.
Yeah.
I found it really useful.
Yeah, and honestly, this is one thing that I love about the blueprint too. You always start with your analytics strategy. And here that means chatting with your stakeholders, talking through the challenges at hand. So for us, we didn't have one trusted data source. We had 20 different homegrown data sources made by 20 different people. This means they were inconsistent and incomplete, and then anytime someone wanted to have a data-driven conversation, we first began with a healthy debate about whose data was correct. Now, at the same time, we had these folks who were not so comfortable working with the database, didn't have access to data, and therefore weren't really part of these data-driven conversations. So our goal here was to create a single source of truth, trusted and governed, that everybody had access to. That meant at every level, from Nina's down to her individual employees as well. Next, we listed needs, questions, and audiences. Now, Nina, this was a very people-oriented part of the process. Yeah.
What I really want to highlight here is that as we talked about the data source creation, we put ourselves in the shoes of every single person on the team who would access the data. We thought about what it's like when they come in the morning to work, what questions they have, and as they incur challenges, what kinds of solutions will best help them move forward. It was absolutely a people-focused conversation before it was a data-focused conversation.
Absolutely. So by the end of this step, we knew that our data had to be global, not just for Nina's national team. We knew it had to be historical so that folks can see trends about how their career was progressing. And we knew it needed to feel comfortable to everybody, familiar, so that they could be comfortable using it. Now, lastly, we visualized frameworks and drill downs. This was to make sure we got the details right. At this part, we started gathering information about tables, information about fields, to make sure they were relevant and correct. Now that we got the details right, it was time to build. Now, step one is always enrichment and preparation. And this is just about gathering those tables and fields that you identified, relating them together in something like Tableau Prep or Tableau Desktop, and checking for things like performance and accuracy. Now, all the while that I was creating this data source, I was doing small checks in Tableau Desktop, making simple vises like this one to make sure that my data was sound. Then, once I was confident in the data, I needed to make sure my users were going to be as well. Metadata management is that step about making the data feel familiar and comfortable. It means renaming fields so that they're human readable, adding calculations that everyone can agree on, and adding a data dictionary. So for us, that means adding comments to all those fields so that when they connect in Tableau Desktop, for example, they can simply hover over each field, see where it comes from, or taking one look at the data source and data catalog, like you see here, read through the whole data dictionary, understand where to use things and what they're intended for.
And I have to give a huge thank you to Rachel. I don't know if any of you have ever begun meetings where for the first 20 minutes, everyone is arguing about whether the data is right or wrong or trustworthy, and it takes up a lot of time. By having the data dictionary, people could ensure that the data was trusted beforehand, and I got to kick off my leadership meetings talking about what matters most to me, which is our people and our customers. Huge thank you.
Absolutely. And lastly, once my users were confident in the data, I needed to make sure this thing was going to go. Data source management is about making sure that this data source has lasting power. It means maintenance on it. For us, it meant certifying the data source. Now, that little digital ribbon in Tableau Server means a whole lot to people who are looking for data sources to use. And at Tableau, getting that digital ribbon of certification is actually a very stringent process. I needed to create technical documentation, include the link in the shorter version of our documentation here, have a backup owner so that if anything happened to me, this data source would continue to go on. And now 2 years later, this thing is still going, and the outcomes are amazing. So now, not only is everyone having the same, different conversations about the same data, but everyone has access to it, from Nina's level and above down to her individual people. Globally, we can see trends, and everybody has a voice here because everybody has access to this data.
Excellent. If any of you have ever made an organizational data source, I want to thank you because I know what kind of work this goes in for Rachel. I'd ask you all to give her an applause, but none of you would be able to hear it because of your headphones. Um, oh,
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh my God, I'm going to cry. Thank you.
fabulous, that was awesome. So now that we have this foundation to work off and all of these ideas about what to build, and the 25 plus questions from earlier, where do we start? One of the most difficult things about leadership is learning how to prioritize and to help people focus on what's important. And when I find myself overwhelmed with ideas or decisions or even a plethora of data, I root myself back in the question, what is most important to our people? And in this case, which data is most important to our people? Now by important, I mean, what will help them be the most successful to force multiply their efforts across our customer base, to grow their careers, and to speak their story? To drill down even further, I'm a huge fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I love the book, Outliers, Stories of Success, where he details how people's narratives lead up to successful outcomes later in life. And he says that three things: autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward are the qualities that work has to have if it is to be satisfying. Now, I would venture that satisfaction at work is the minimum bar we should be hitting. We want to aim for excellence, for innovation, for the best environment to come to every single day, and for teamwork. So how then do we apply data to this? Well, there's a huge opportunity when we talk about connection between effort and reward. After all, data helps us see the results of work that we've done and of initiatives that we've led. So how do we visually connect effort to reward? Well, it's interesting when I started thinking about this because on my team, we all have the same intention. We help people make decisions about data and Tableau, and we grow our Tableau community. But when I look at effort and reward at my level, I'm looking at national trends across 7 or 8 teams and trying to identify next steps based on an aggregate level of output. Now, our regional manager, Alex, down in Texas, has the same intentions, but again, his view of effort and reward is going to be different. He's looking at the output of his team, how they affect their regional community, and how training and onboarding have helped them grow and succeed. Now take it one step further to individuals on his team, people who work with you every single day. And their intentions of helping people make decisions are the same, but their outputs are going to be more rapid. They're looking for ways to progress their career, to tweak the way that they serve customers, and to identify how they stack up against their peers in other parts of the company. So how do we visualize or create a dashboard that tells the story of the entire team where everyone at every level can relate to the same effort and reward regardless of what their day-to-day looks like? Well, this time we came back to the same preparation method that we used for the data source, but this time for a visualization. We talked about goals and decisions. In this case, we wanted data transparency to permeate the entire organization so that we had a common verbiage to understand how people were successful and what behaviors at every level were driving success within the department. We listed the needs, questions, and audiences, and yes, Rachel and I ordered lunch. This time we invited a few other people, and we whiteboarded every question that people could possibly ask related to that connection between effort and reward. And again, we put ourselves in the shoes of every audience member. This time we actually had roundtables where we accepted feedback and learned a lot about people's questions that we hadn't previously assumed. And then finally, we visualized drill downs. What's really interesting here is that we wanted to provide people with enough data to be successful and to drive creativity and to do things we hadn't thought of before, but we did not want to overwhelm them with options and drill downs and filters to the point where the entire dashboard became irrelevant and the intention and purpose was lost. So how did we strike that balance? Well, there were certainly some preparation and design elements in the building process that I'll let Rachel cover.
Thanks. So, creating a dashboard. Step one is content validation. All right, so we got in a room, talked about the needs here. We then took to the whiteboard and started drawing out what we wanted it to actually look like. Now, this part is huge. Me being plugged into my leaders as an analyst makes this process go, one, faster, I get it right the first time, but two, allows us to really hone in on the important things and cut out anything that isn't important. Now, as far as content design, once you start building a dashboard, I have a few key principles that I always like to incorporate. Number one, place your users in control of the interface. This means make it interactive, make it easy. Form follows function, right? If you show a filter, you want it to act how it looks. So encouraging your users to interact gives them more space to play around, ask and answer those questions. Number two, make it comfortable to interact with a product. Now, as Marie Kondo would say, if a viz doesn't give you joy, remove it. Even if it took you 4 hours, yes, even if it's the most beautiful viz you've ever made, even if it's that awesome balloon chart from Iron Viz, if it's not useful, gotta remove it. Number three, reduce cognitive load. Now, this dapper gentleman is George Miller, a cognitive psychologist who came up with the theory of chunking. He says that the human brain can retain 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information. This means putting related items together in your dashboard, legends next to the viz that they're referencing, for example, so that the human brain can retain all that information and not have to go back and forth and try to remember things. They can see it all at once. Lastly, make user interfaces consistent. Not only does this make it easier for your users to recognize how to interact with your dashboard immediately, but you're also building a brand for yourself and your team. Now, the last thing here is, I think, one of the most important. We leveraged data stewards once I had created this dashboard. Data stewards were integrated into Nina's team. They had raised their hands and said, hey, I am interested in data. I want to be a beacon for people to come and ask me questions.
Yeah, and I was really happy to source people from my team who were not only interested in learning about internal analytics, but they were also interested in a new type of leadership opportunity, a way to build other people without maybe being in direct management. These people reside in every location that our team sits in. They are experts in the data source, and they are the first responders to any questions about operational dashboards that Rachel and I have produced. What's probably even more important, though, is that these people funnel feedback, funnel ideas from all of our cities and help Rachel and I iterate and make every single operational dashboard better. So not only are they helping with communication, but they're also taking ownership and helping us build something that is still as useful and as relevant as before. So let's talk about the output of this entire process, because no doubt it's a bit lengthy, but it was really fun. First, before I show you the dashboard, I want to give a shout out to a department that most of us don't work with when it comes to analysts. I want to give a shout out to our human resources department, because as we embarked on this project and we shared with them what we were doing, they helped us document the profile of every single person in the organization and what their role looked like, what the expectations of the role were, and what this person does day to day. Now that might sound like something you don't use in an analytics type project, but we leveraged that to ensure that the dashboards created spoke to what was already documented about the type of person that we were reaching out to. And so what you see here is a metrics dashboard. And while yes, it's bar charts and a scatter plot, it's actually quite complex. It shows the holistic view of outputs that all of the roles on our team generate. And what you can't see here is that the dashboard actually drills down on these metrics all the way down to the individual level, up to a regional manager level, and then I can pull that up to a national level as well.
Notice too some of the concepts, the design concepts integrated here. So we have our interactive portion along the top, we have our filters, we have parameters to see more or fewer employees on here. You can't see here, but if you hover over any of the bars, you can highlight folks across the dashboard and narrow in. We use chunking and put all of our key metrics together in one place, and we've reduced cognitive load by narrowing it down to the top 70th percentile. Now that too is interactive. But one of my favorite parts about this is the stories that folks can gather here. Anybody on Nina's team can come in here, see who's excelling at each particular metric, recognize that they've got something they're doing, they want to go hear about it. They'll go ask them about their stories.
Along the lines of stories, one thing that's really important as a leader is to be able to recognize and to see people on your team. I live over 2,000 miles away from half of the people that work within our team. By using a dashboard like this, I can see what the outputs are, what that effort looks like at an individual and regional basis. I can see the story of somebody developing, pick up the phone and learn more where I otherwise would not have had that interaction, and that helps us build a more inclusive environment. Now, along those lines, we've also seen dashboards like this help employees manage and direct conversations with their leadership. So as opposed to telling somebody what they need to do to be great, we actually had one employee, this is an excellent example, work through each of these metrics over the course of a year. Now, he focused on documenting behaviors that helped him improve in every single area of customer service and customer challenges. As he needed, he reached out to people who excelled in those areas and shadowed and mentored and learned. And this was an incredibly autonomous way for him to progress himself. And I'm happy to say that after directing those conversations, after learning, after documenting, and after seeing his reward driven from that effort, he was offered and accepted his dream job in New York last summer. Now, on top of that, when you create these dashboards, what you may not expect to happen, but what I love the most, is that you start to see spin-off dashboards. Now, these are excellent because it means that people are taking the design that Rachel implemented, so visual best practices, as well as the accurate, stable data source that we're all using, and they're beginning to build their own tools that help them manage their time, serve customers more effectively. Now, most of all, what I'm the proudest of is that these dashboards are currently in their second iteration, and this time, Rachel and I are not building. We're guiding a team of data stewards who are creating a dashboard that shows the evolution of our job and our role. You see, as our customers change, as technology changes, and as our industry evolves, so do we as consultants. And a dashboard is not about showing metrics or showing numbers and ensuring that we're ticking boxes moving forward. It's supposed to reflect who we are, what we're doing, and help us become better. And as our role and our responsibility evolves, the data should too. So with that said, we have one last story and one last question for you today. How do leaders use data to collaborate with each other? How often do you use data to drive conversations with people outside of your team, outside of your department, or across different leadership channels? It is absolutely essential to do that in order to increase collaboration. And if you're not totally bought in to the need for collaboration, I encourage you to check out a book called Collective Genius. Linda Hill, the co-author of that book, also has a TED Talk where she discusses the process of collecting data from industries and companies worldwide. And the goal was to better understand what drives innovation. What was the pattern that they were seeing over and over and over again? Now, they defined innovation as the building or creating of something new and useful. That applies to all of us, right? And she says that innovation is not about solo genius, it is about collective genius. And the pattern they constantly saw is that innovation was driven by an environment where collaboration was welcome, it was encouraged, and every tool that was provided was intended to drive new conversations. Okay, so you want to create a visualization that drives collaboration across leadership. What does that viz even look like? Well, if you Google collaborative dashboards, you get something like this. I'm not exactly feeling the warm, fuzzy vibes of collaboration when I look at this view. So what kind of visual best practices can we take to ensure that those conversations begin in the first place? Well, you're probably used to this by now, but we came back to our preparation method. Goals and decisions. We wanted to encourage conversations between myself and my 30 or 40 peers across the country, because we want to constantly be ahead of the curve when it comes to serving our people and serving our customers. We listed needs, questions, and audiences. This time the range of audiences was huge. We wanted to speak to people in different regions, leaders of different types of teams, so that we could better see how our teams worked together and how they served customers together. And then finally, visualizing frameworks and drill downs. This would be a bit different because we knew that our leaders cared about KPIs along with each other and wanted to drill down from a date range basis, from a regional basis, and better understand how our teams were not just collaborating, but communicating and driving outcomes. Let's jump right into design. What do you say?
Let's do it. Now I have 4 more visual best practices for you when designing what we call an executive dashboard or a business summary dashboard. Now this is the actual output. This is something that Nina uses all the time to talk to other leaders. Now, everyone direct your attention to number 1. This viz type here is a scorecard or a KPI chart, right? Leaders want to know very quickly what the current state is. So this is about taking those numbers that matter most, putting them front and center so we can see very quickly what's going on. Now, number 2 here is meant to represent trends. So below our scorecard, we have these green and red year over year percentages, growth. And underneath it, we have in the bar chart reference lines to indicate what last year's numbers looked like. Not only do leaders want to see what the current state is, they want to see how these numbers are trending, get a sense of the story, whether we're improving, how we should change. Now, number 3, and everyone should know this one, is a bar chart. We love bar charts. Leaders not only want to see the current state and the trends, but they want to drill down. So from a national level, Nina can see everything. She then probably wants to see the teams that her team works with and how they're working well together. Number 4 is our set of interactive filters. Now this is huge, especially for a collaborative dashboard, because these filters in combination can slice this dashboard 100 different ways. That's 100 different conversations that Nina can have with 100 different people.
Excellent. The dashboard is fantastic, but one of the huge keys to driving a data culture is consistent communication. Leveraging a dashboard like this in a way that is consistent and that is predictable so people always know where that foundation lies and can build the conversation from there. In my case, I was shocked at how often I've been able to leverage this dashboard that Rachel made because it's so flexible and it's so simple to use. I can even view it quickly on my phone. Now, what I hadn't expected was how I would use it. For instance, I can share this dashboard in an internal training meeting to better understand how to ramp and onboard our people based on the current outcomes and challenges that we've seen across our teams. I subscribe to this dashboard before every single staff meeting because I want to make sure that I'm able to answer questions regardless of who in the room is asking them. Likewise, I can send the dashboard to my leadership on Slack if I have a question or an inquiry. And suddenly we're having a conversation across the entire country in a matter of minutes to understand what next steps to take. We can filter before planning meeting as we resource and staff to again understand how we're going to drive outcomes as the need begins to increase. And then probably most importantly is discuss with teams at all hands. There's absolutely no reason that we cannot be transparent with the dashboards, with the metrics, and with the conversations that we're having as leaders. Enabling your team with a view into that conversation helps them become a greater part of the business that you're driving and the organization that you're building. Not only that, but it encourages them to become part of the conversation and to contribute their creative ideas and feedback. After all, it's my job to empower and to serve them.
Now, collaborating, innovating is not just for leaders. This is also about collaborating and innovating between leader and analyst. And a special part of collaboration is use cases. Now, this is specifically successes that Nina finds in her team or that bubble up from our data stewards, or things that they're finding challenging in the content I give them. This allows me to take the content, improve upon it, be better plugged in so that I can make good content for them the next time I'm making something. This helps me prioritize my job, know exactly what to do. It's huge.
Here's a quick example of a use case scenario that I discussed with Rachel not very long ago. One of the leaders that I work with, he and I were sitting in his office and we were reviewing the dashboard that you just saw. And as we were reviewing it, we noticed a downward trend in one of the KPIs that we watch. As we viewed that trend, we drilled down to a team level and to regional levels, and we noticed that the trend was actually wide scale. It was across all of our teams. In fact, we opened a new window in the browser, connected to the same data source, and began to build a view of our team's activity and noticed that there were specific drops when the needs of our team started to increase, so when we were the busiest. Now, armed with that dashboard as well as our findings, we split up and we spoke to all of the leaders on our teams as well as some of the people within the offices and our data stewards, trying to uncover what we could do to make that trend increase. Now, the data took us to a certain point, but what the people told us was that there was actually a communication process that was hindering their ability to work quickly and flexibly together. There was a manual email process that was causing people to spend more time trying to communicate problems to one another than actually helping customers. So within a matter of about 7 business days, we implemented a new process with feedback across the country. We created a dashboard that would proactively alert people to when they should work together, as opposed to forcing them to go through a manual email process. We moved most of our communication to Slack as well, as it would be faster and more efficient. So over the course of about 7 business days, we identified and solved a problem across over 300 people that increased our ability to serve customers by 30%. Pretty cool. Innovation does not have to be a brand new invention. It doesn't have to be something huge. It can simply be a change in process that teams work together to identify and solve. All right, so we've told 3 stories. We've talked about creating a data source, creating a dashboard, connecting effort and reward, and then collaborating using data. So let's start to boil it down into some key takeaways Rachel and I have learned. First and foremost, data proficiency and a healthy community go hand in hand. The more we were able to give our people access to data, access to a trusted data source, the more time they were able to save, and the more they were able to drive their own conversations. As we continue to increase that proficiency across leadership channels and across managers, we were able to build a community where many different voices have been heard to contribute new ideas, new feedback, and ensure that we have a diverse range of solutions to solve the problems that are no doubt as diverse as the population that we serve.
We also have a repeatable framework for you to begin any data project. First, look at goals and decisions. Find out where you're going. Two, list needs, questions, and audiences. This will help you step into the shoes of the folks where this content will be relevant. And lastly, visualize frameworks and drill downs to help you get the details right. Doing so, you can make managed data sources, visualize expectations, and create consistent data-driven conversations, just like Nina and I did.
Okay, so this is the part where it is completely acceptable to take out your phones and take a picture. These are questions that might help you get started on that data-driven journey on creating these conversations when you get back home on Monday. After all, just like our story, everything starts with questions. Now, my personal favorite, whether I'm planning, building, or collaborating, is always to ask, what are the desired outcomes? What problems are we solving, and what behaviors are we trying to drive? That's how we will know what success looks like and whether or not it has been achieved.
Nina, I also really like in this building section, who is the audience and what are their goals? So you're designing content for people, not content for content's sake.
Now, when we talk about building it for people, my next favorite question is, how are we communicating intent and expectations of visualizations? Technology and data does not just exist for data's sake. It's here to help people. So we need to ensure that when we create dashboards or visualizations or a data source, that the intention, the purpose, and the desired outcome of those are communicated across the many different audiences who might access it at multiple levels.
Absolutely. And then closing that loop too, this very last question under collaboration. What mechanisms exist for constant improvement, communication, and iteration across my business, whether that's between me and Nina from our data stewards or even over Slack between teams? Now, we've given you lots of resources. There are lots more for you. Of course, you have Tableau Blueprint online. You can take the surveys, see exactly where you are in Blueprint so you can know how to continue moving along your data journey. We also have lots of online resources. Tableau has white papers, blogs. There are books out there. There are your Tableau user groups. And I think most importantly, your people are the most important resource, whether that's someone on your team, your leaders, your employees, or even the folks sitting next to you with a pair of silent disco headphones on.
Now, if you're curious about how to start that data culture today, great news is that you're still at Tableau Conference, and we've got a few resources that will help you out with. Rachel and I are going to hang out after the session today for any questions that you have, but you can also visit the Blueprint booth, speak to experts. You can learn more about taking the Blueprint assessment, which kind of helps you understand where your culture is at today so that you know what types of questions to begin with. You can explore e-learning paths. We talked a lot about putting yourselves in the shoes of different audiences, and at Tableau, we're really trying to drive education that speaks to different audiences well, because it's so important. And then finally, look for the Tableau Blueprint under the activities in the TC app to learn more about what might be going on in this last day of conference. So finally, this session wouldn't be complete if we didn't ask you for a little bit of data. Please, please, please take the survey in your mobile app. Obviously, Rachel and I talk about data together a lot, and we want to make sure that as we create content like this in the future, it stays relevant to people like yourselves. So with that said, we have so appreciated sharing this time with you. Long live data, and thank you.